Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob, broadcasting to you from the Extreme Studios in the Extreme Movie Show Palace here, just west of Orlando, Florida, the Pinos Palace, as I like to say. And here, I also have a treat in Central Florida. I have the young Professor Pixel, the 20-something guy, who's going to give me his take tonight, along with mine, on the 2012 film by Neil Jordan called Byzantium. It's a film that initially, Pixel, I would describe as something RDV, who hosts with us a lot of times at 7 o'clock on Tuesdays. I don't think this is a film he would like, and I'm not sure if he would, because this, to me, is a melodrama. It's a vampire tale of two women. It's obviously a mother and daughter combination. I think they do a great job of hiding the supposed feminism stuff until the third act. But God damn it, this is one of the best looking films I've seen in a long time in vampire films, period. And I definitely want to talk a lot about the sexuals and how this movie's done well, because it's very sexy. It's done well. This is how I've said before, we should look at doing movies that involve vampirism or something else, where we put just a new variation on the theme and interpret into it. And I think they hit a home run with this. But unfortunately, even though I'd never heard of this film, Princess is somebody on our channel who recommended it. Kudos to Princess for that. But I liked it a lot. I was kind of surprised. I was also surprised because it's a long movie and it felt really long, but it had that certain gothic sensibility to it. And I'm really surprised people don't talk about it more. It kind of bombed here in the States, I guess, but it's the first watch for me. I +1. There you go. Who would have thunk it? What about you? What's your initial take?
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much on that same page. Because listen, there's no lie. We've been doing a lot of lesbian vampires.
It's not about them being lesbians. It's just vampire.
They just they're vampires who happen to be lesbian. But no, the mother-daughter, it was a nice change. I wasn't sure what to expect going straight in, but it doesn't like hold back on the vampirism. But you're right, it's a melodrama. It's a mother-daughter. The daughter's trying to live her own life, but she's lived the last 200 years with her mother, who just keeps starting up whorehouses wherever she goes.
Well, I want to mention that because, let's be honest, what happens in here is the mom we see early on is working. Look, I have a soft spot for smoking and movies and coffee and cigarettes and all that stuff, and also strip clubs, because you never really get a chance to see them. And we always talk about, when we do our James Bond reviews, how we have an opening gambit, right? Here we see a woman giving a lap dance to somebody, and the guy gets a little too handsy, too fresh, and things happen. So you kind of have an opening sequence here. And it turns out the mom here has this daughter, and it's interesting because what I thought they didn't get into a lot of, and it's there in the movie, but I thought was the best part, was the roles that everybody has. So, like, for example, she grew up being a whore, and her daughter ended up growing up being how she was, and that was never going to change over the 200 years or so that they've been, technically, as you'll find out, I'm not going to say too much about the film. We'll say a little bit. They're technically on the run, and the reason why is because you find out, like, late in the second act, third act, that it's an all-boys club. It's the men's club. It's the sophisticated people that go, oh my God, we have the secret to eternal life. They will only bestow this gift upon a few. You can look at it that way. I'm paraphrasing. And they were ashamed that a woman, especially one that's a whore, wouldn't be able to do such a thing. And the way she does it and all that unfolds. And you see the parallel story of what happens in the past and also in the future. And what I really liked about it, too, is the guy basically says, well, she's going to live by her covenants. That's fine. You break them, we hunt you down, we kill you, because we don't let women in this role, and that's it. So they're off the hook. So what I thought Neil Jordan did really good with this is that I think he did Interview with a Vampire, if I'm correct. So he knows vampire movies. But I think what he did here is he took what you thought would be your typical sexual, hey, here's a woman that's a whore. Okay, she's a vampire. Oh, she's doing whorehouses in modern time to get by. Well, you know what? For 200 years, that's what she knows, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think he did a great job of kind of taking that and not making you feel like, oh, she's a hooker with a heart of gold and all that bullshit kind of stuff. He takes it to a level further where you go, okay, I understand what they are, but he makes those things different when it comes to the sex roles and all that too, especially with the two guys. The young guy you figured she'd want to run off with, and then the older guy who was the real bastard of the story that you find out. You're like, okay, now it makes sense what's going on. What were you going to say?
Yeah, yeah. Who knew Sherlock Holmes could be this one?
Well, look, the opening bit gets us to where they're going to be, and Byzantium isn't necessarily the name of the hotel that they're at, and as well as the nice guy, the knight in shining army, who kind of shows up. It also has to do with something in the third act. But what did you think about this whole setup and how they got to where they were at and what they were trying to do once things settled down and started turning into a story?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was a little more interested in the we've been here before. No, we haven't. Shut up. But because her mother really didn't care about the past. She tried to move on from it as soon as possible, but she kept falling into the same traps. Um, but that whole where the past was flashing into Eleanor's mind was always neat to see. Like she was looking at basically herself, and then having that intercut with reality as she's trying to, she's still a 16-year-old forever. But when it starts to fall apart for the rest of the humans of the cast is when, well, the boy, Jack, starts to tell the story he was told.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the third act, what happens is, kind of back up here for a second. They get set up in this town, and I just have to say this. The movie's beautifully shot. A lot of it's in Ireland. Most of it is. It's just incredibly gorgeous. They're in kind of a smaller town that has a college into it. And so we know that there are people looking for them. We don't know who they are, but as they start telling the story of what happens in the past and they kind of cut back and forth, they do it in a really good way. You and I always talked about with Dark Shadows how Dan Curtis always sets a really nice gothic type of environment. We talk about the lit candles and the smoke machines and everything else there too, and the wind blowing, and it's stupid, but it works. Here they do it with the rain, they do it with the shots of the town, of her walking. It's like she's like Little Red Riding Hood or whatever with that stupid red thing of hers or whatever, but she's got these incredibly pale blue eyes. I don't know if they're contacts, so that's how she is. She has a look to her, and they talk more of them being revenants, I guess, rather than vampires, although it's mentioned. So I kind of liked it when I didn't know 100% the supernatural aspect to it, because of course we find out exactly how everything works in the third act. So I liked how they set up the human character part too and all that too. It's just one of those things I was not expecting.
I mean, you say that you said that this film is a long film and it feels long, not in a bad way. But I don't know, because it feels like the perfect balance, because as we're discussing, this second act in this small town feels like it lasts a while, and compared to the rest of the movie, it's actually quite just a small chunk of time. Because once they finally get there, get settled, actually start up the business, it goes from there to Eleanor telling her story, her truth.
All right, so
the film is 2 hours long.
Yeah. Now, I want to back up and say this, and we typically don't dabble in politics necessarily, or whether something's this or that, unless it's just apparent in the story or whatever. Our personal beliefs, we keep aside all that. We just want to talk about what we like and we didn't like. And so here, when I said before, I think it was a feminist movie, I don't mean that as a negative or a positive. I just think what they're doing, I think they did well. And so when you see a woman and you want to talk about the morality of, she's a lap dancer, she's a whore, she's bottom of the earth scumbag, however, wherever you put somebody like that on a more scale. The point is early on we don't know what her backstory is, right? So we just see her as a female with what's going on until she whacks the guy. There's a lot of decapitations in here, by the way, which is kind of funny.
Well, that's the best way to kill a vampire.
That is true. But Clara is the mom, and I believe this actress, if I'm pronouncing her name right, Gemma Arterton, or Artur.
Gemma.
Say again, Gemma? Is that how you say it?
Gemma. Yeah.
Gemma Arterton. I think she was in
She's
Hansel and
beautiful.
Gretel.
Dear God.
That was my whole point. She's a complete smoke show in here, and there's nothing
Mm.
like beautiful women, beautiful men, just beautiful sets, beautiful pieces of dress, beautiful food everywhere. You see that in the Dan Curtis production. You see it a little bit here. Beautiful restaurant with old people there, piano playing. It's beautiful. She's a complete smoke show in her body, everything. She's no skinny mini. She's the real deal. But she has what I've always said before when we talked about, say, the Hammer horror films, they couldn't really show like what you can today. So they got by on sensuality and the hint of eroticism. Here with her, she's in complete 100% control of her sexuality, and she uses it, and I have zero issues with it. It works because the men in here, you could argue the feminist negative point to it is that the men are completely weak. The boy has leukemia, the one that her daughter Eleanor is falling in love with, so to speak. And of course, the guy that saves him, whose wife died or mother ran off or whatever like that, he's a loser of a guy. He's a nice guy. I felt like that was kind of convenient for him to be there. I thought something more could have come of that. But even the two guys hunting are one ends up being a good dude, one ends up being bad, because you find out that the two guys from about 200 years ago, the way Clara meets them as the mom, she's just your atypical 16, 17, 18-year-old, whatever, young woman who's a clam digger or whatever you want to call it. And she's just out there on the shore by the beach, and a guy comes up and he likes to sample one. And he's, I guess, from the British Royal Navy or like that. He's on a horse. It's a nice scene. It's beautiful. And he takes it and he's like, oh, that's pretty good. And he like gives her a pearl. He's like, a pearl for a pearl. And then his superior comes in, and I thought this was interesting at first because I thought, oh, he's the older guy. Would that make sense in terms of again, going back to what we were talking about with horrors and anticipation of what you think of the sexuals are and end up being different in this film? You figure that the older guy would take on a younger one like that, and he would be, quote unquote, the good catch, right? But it turns out he's a complete asshole. He takes her to a whorehouse where he's got hookups. He rapes her, basically. The child that is produced is his daughter, Eleanor, who she ends up giving up to stay being a whore, and then ends up leaving later after he ends up raping Eleanor himself. And you're like, this is a sick fuck. But they hold all that back for a big chunk of the film to focus on the relationship between these two. And despite it all, I thought Claire did a great job juggling her role as a protector, as a provider, them being on the run, which Eleanor really did not know, and also having to deal with all this shit in her. She was a strong, independent, single mom. It sounds hokey, but it really does come across that well in this movie, I think. What about you?
Yeah, no, I can see that. Like Clara, she's doing something very uncouth, but she's no way the villain of our tale here. She is not the antagonist, even though she does get a little, Eleanor, how dare you? What are you doing? Stop. And
Yeah,
then
I mean, it's
locking
like
her.
the comment in the chat there about using the guy. It's true, but here's the thing: the guy comes up, and as a man hearing all this, you can understand that he's in a low point in his life. He's, despite the fact he's got this rundown hotel, which they turn into a horror house and solve it stuff. It's a mutually adult, beneficial relationship. I'm not saying it's void of emotion or love or any of those other kind of things, but they both know what they're getting into. He just doesn't know what to extent, because obviously she's not going to tell him that, hey, I'm a vampire, by the way, and this is what's going on. She takes charge of the situation because you know what? He needs her to do that. And so that's kind of the interesting things about the roles of being in a relationship. You can argue about 50-50 and all that stuff if you believe on that, the red pill, blue pill, black pill stuff that's out there. But generally, two people fill in each other's voids a little bit, and the person that's in charge of something is the one that leads that, and she was definitely the one in here, and I like that about her. It didn't show her as just, oh, somebody knows how to spread her legs and get some coin. It wasn't like that at all. And we find out that she, of course, has like tuberculosis or something because she's coughing up blood and all that. And then that's where they get into the spiritual part of how the revenants become that way, because there's this little island that they go to devoid of all that, and what happens in there happens in there, and you can see that, and you're like, oh, okay. But again, talking about characters, backing up for a moment, that's the key thing is it's this movie was not concerned with how strong vampires can they run, can they be in the sunlight, do crosses work, garlic. It's not about that at all. We know what they are. We know what difficulties they present in a situation as we're watching it. And so I thought it was pretty interesting that they got this guy that's got leukemia that wants to get to know her. He's just a guy that works at the old person's hotel where the piano playing's at. And there's some great dialogue in there too. Like when she goes up there to play and he's like, hey, it's okay if you want to pass the hat around, to get some money, because he can tell she's kind of in some need, and she's like, but I don't have a hat. I mean, there's some irony of that, of some of these situations too. So it's not just a cute meat thing or whatever. It was pretty entertaining. I really was surprised by how well they developed those situations and how long they took to let them kind of sink in before they put the well, this is how it happened and this is what we're going to do at the end, because I think a lot of movies shit the bed when they get to that third act.
Yeah, no, I could see that. But this one, like, it doesn't. I mean, no, we should go ahead and discuss the ending, because.
Go ahead, yeah, bring it up.
I mean, Clara ends up getting somewhat chased. Eleanor is taken by these two, Johnny Lee Miller and the earlier Edwardian era soldier we were talking about. Not Edwardian era, but whatever. And
the good guy and the bad guy.
Yeah, the good guy and the bad guy. They're dressed as cops and they've been following this case all along. But it wasn't until about halfway through the film I realized, oh crap, they're the same person. But anyway, they end up getting Eleanor. And they're driving. They want to deal with Clara, but Clara wants to deal with the boy, Jack, who Eleanor has fallen for. But she stops, realizing that her daughter's in danger, goes after her. And don't you love it when people crash into the windshield?
That's I liked when Chuck Norris did it when he jumped through it, and that's the same one where he kicked the guy off the bike. It's like, good guys wear black. I forget off the top of my head, but no, it's a little melodramatic at the end. But I think the thing here is that the point you mentioned earlier is it's probably the weakest part of the story to me, where we see that Eleanor's been writing her story down in beautiful handwriting too, and throwing the pages out. And the old man gets it. That was kind of neat. They have their own moral code on how they kill people, but she joins the college so that way she can, get along with this guy she's kind of liking, and he's got his own situation. I'd written in chat that, I appreciated how he was aware of what a situation was and the reality of it. So in the way he was mature about it, which is good, because it's not like he's, 6'2", 220 and a hunk, I'm not saying he's ugly, but in a small town, when you get a beautiful woman like that interested in you, yeah, he was assertive. I give him all the props in the world for going after her and trying to help her out. He was very open and honest and sincere about how he felt. And a lot of times I think that gets lost in translation when you're talking about relationships. So I thought that was somewhat genuine, even though you could argue that she really doesn't know relationships because, frankly, other than being raped, who has she been with? You know what I'm saying? So there's that, I hate to say it sounds hokey, that innocence part to it, even though she's 200 years old and we don't know what's going on there too. But what it is this lit guy or whoever like that has him lay down, is talking about identity and all this crap, which is cool because it happens to be the same room where she was a girl 200 years ago when it was an orphanage or whatever. Those kind of scenes are really great in this movie where they intertwine.
And she's staring out that window where her mother would.
Yes, I mean those shots that elevates it, but he reads it, and this is what I thought was completely unrealistic. He goes to the female lit chick and is basically like, "Hey, read this." It's like, Edgar Allan Poe and Mary Shelley had, whatever kind of crap they say, and they're reading it. And what do? Instead of saying, hey, this is really good, or who'd she rip off, or anything that would be realistic, they want to report her to the police like she's a bad person. I'm like, are you effing kidding me? Are we that sensitive today? And I guess the answer is yes. I don't know. Just saying, it's you can't write anything or say anything.
I didn't think they were really that way until they saw that her mother was running a whorehouse with her living in the same place.
But here's the thing with that dude. when you see him and he's walking around, he could give two flying fucks about what's going on in that room. And when when he comes in, the young man, and he says, "I think you should read it because it's her story." That's her way of communicating to him, "Hey, I really am telling you the truth about who I am." And so she's earnestly trying to connect with him, and she doesn't really know how to. They haven't had relations, right? So it's like he goes and he reads it, and you're like, yeah, he's just playing the piano, like, yeah, fuck everybody. I just have to do this because I've got nothing else to do. It just seems like a real asshole. And so when they go to the whorehouse, the hotel, and he walks around seeing all that stuff there too, that's when it really starts to pick up, and it gets a little crazy at the end with the car chase and everything else there too, because the lonely guy who owns it ends up dying. Somewhat tragically, but you can kind of see it coming, and it's sort of convenient. But it doesn't, I think, take away from the fact that the movie is, again, it's awesome. It's beautiful. I was really surprised and struck by how well it just looks and how it's crafted. The back and forth part I thought was really, really good too. And two beautiful women, each with their own different look. But how did you pronounce her name? Gemma or Gemma?
It's Gemma. It's
like
Gemma
Gemma.
with a soft, basically a soft G.
Gemma. Wow. She owned her role. I guess I'm most surprised that even though this movie's like 10, 11 years old, I've never heard of it. I think I might have, because the preview almost looked like something I'd be like, oh, that's pretty good. Wow. Yeah. What else would you like to talk about with the film?
Just I don't know. I'm happy with the ending, but it's basically just they're going their separate ways. She's going to make Jack a vampire, and I guess Carla, I know
Carla, the mom.
Clara. That's what she went by.
Claire.
I go by Claire now. Claire and her lover in another life is going to be her lover in this life, and they're going to run around.
Well, it's that whole thing of she's going to reconnect with the guy that was interested in her genuinely when she got the pearl. And if you notice, she was wearing a pearl necklace. And take the symbolism out of there, if you will, graphically speaking, because they've not had relations. But they're going to go on, and they talk a little bit about the brethren of the people that are hunting them and all that too. And he wants her company, and so you're like, okay, this guy was a young man who was also naive in the ways of the world. You find out what happens to him and how he turns, and it makes sense. So now they're both on the same page, so they're ready to start the relationship 200 years later, because timing in a relationship is really important. And again, as hokey as it sounds, Eleanor is able to go off and be with her man that she's never really had a chance to be with, or any others for that too. So they have to go through all this tragedy so they can possibly have a happily ever after relationship in the future. And again, it sounds so goofy, but it reminded me a lot of the movie we covered last week called Lips of Blood, where the one dude is gaslit into believing he never met a young woman or a woman when he was a kid. And he goes back to the countryside, and turns out she's a vampire. And at the end, they go off to an island and kind of do the same
Sand
thing.
Island.
Well, yeah, but the point is do you see the similarities there? It's like, oh my God, did they take from this? I don't know, but it's incredible to me, the timing of how we've talked about two vampire movies where at the end it's about you and your lover going off to be together, where somebody has to turn. I mean, honestly, you don't really get that in vampire movies.
I don't know. I think vampires are actually the most romantic of classic monsters, as it were. So I see a lot of that. And I mean, think about it. They're also the most human other than the Invisible Man, I guess. That they are immortal beings. They sell their soul, sure, but they're still there. It's still a person, even though they're undead. It's not like a zombie or a werewolf that just eats. It's not like a mindless creature like Frankenstein, who's a child in a body that's far too large. But vampires have this flair to them that's why they're so easy to make into erotic thrillers that we've gone through a couple for the past few weeks. They just have that about them. It feels carnal in a way that's human.
And I hate to say this because I'm not trying to knock down any particular sex role. Traditional ones, I would say that most people believe in, despite whatever beliefs you may have about the stuff. But we've covered a lot of them over the years, and obviously there's a lot more out there. And I know there's some out there to deal with like boredom. You know, hey, I've been a vampire for a couple hundred years. I'm bored out of my mind. What do I do? And all sorts of stuff. We've seen, of course, like Blade, the action type ones, and all that. It's a good fit for it. But all the men ones, let's be honest, they're pretty freaking simple. But the women ones are a lot more complicated. And I think like this can lend to more interesting storytelling because you don't see that attempt being made out of the male vampire role. That's why when we did the Karstein trilogy from Hammer Horror, is really more of a focus on the relationships of the women, and not the fact that they're lesbians, but the whole, you know, kind of love that they may have with each other, or recognizing stuff, and the guys that just happen to be intertwined in them. And you know, Interview with a Vampire, you could argue who's got a little bit of that in there with the male vampires. And of course, Claudette, I think, is the name of the really young one that's 13. So there's definitely something about, like I say, sex roles that you can't ignore when you're talking about vampires in general and how it comes to being, you know, all that. But yeah, I like this movie a lot. You and I and RDV are going to be talking here at 7 o'clock Eastern tonight on Dan Curse's 1974 attempt at Dracula starring Jack Palance, which will be interesting talk to it. Yeah, I'm glad we reviewed this. And, you know, it's a quick, brief review. We didn't really get too deep in it, but it's a beautiful film. I would recommend it. It's different. If melodrama and all that stuff's not your cup of tea and you want action and gore and violence, you're really not going to get it with this film. So I don't want to say it's soap opera-y because I don't feel it's that way, but man, oh man, just the Eleanor, you know, kind of doing a little bit of over talking about her story and watching the pages turn, all that. It's very dreamy and it's done well. And it's hard, I think, to keep that up for a constant 2 hours. So this movie, I think, did really well when it, like I said, explored a lot of the roles of who you are and how they can, you know, might change later. But it really is about mother and daughter having a really strong bond, trying to get through it all and dealing with it. And it surprised me. It wasn't just another vampire flick. It was very good.
Yep.
Final thoughts.
My thoughts exactly.
Okay, 9 more minutes of the Dracula Dan Curtis thing. You know what? I think I think you'll recognize Danny as it happens too. So we'll see how that goes. But Jack Palance, you know, always got to love him. That'll be interesting to see what RDV's take on it is. I believe that's on Tubi right now. For those of you that may not have seen it or wanted to see it, wow, good movie. I just got done watching about an hour or two ago, so it's still kind of, you know, in my head a little bit. All right, guys, we're getting ready to drop the stream and hop on to our 631 of Mission Impossible, the original TV show, season 1, episodes 11 to 12, where we just briefly go over them, talk about what's been going on this season. And we like to do season 1s of certain shows because later on, as we continue to do this and branch into podcasting, we're deciding what stuff we want to be doing in the future and how much fun we're having with these shows. So Mission Impossible, nobody responds to any of the tweets, but we still get the same amount of chunk of people listening to it. So it'll be interesting to kind of see about what's happening tonight because it's like the last 2. All right, guys, thanks for showing up. Thanks for sharing some time with us. See you guys in the next chat. As always, have a good night and stay extreme.
Byzantium is a mother-daughter production.